Welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast, exploring the inner reaches of the heart and mind, brought to you by Rangsheng Yeshigomde, Germany-Austria, and your host, Eric Solomon.
Welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast. Today's guest is Barry Boyce. He's the founding editor of Mindful Magazine and mindful.org. He's been a meditation practitioner since the early 70s and also been teaching Buddhist meditation practice since the early 80s. And he's also a professional writer and editor. He's the editor and primary contributor to Mindfulness Revolution, leading psychologists, scientists, artists, and meditation teachers on the power of mindfulness in daily life. And Barry has worked very closely as a development editor with a number of authors, including Congressman Tim Ryan on A Mindful Nation and The Real Food Revolution. He's also worked with Sharon Salzberg and many other well-known authors, one of them being Pacho Rinpoche and Eric Solomon on their book, Radically Happy, A User's Guide to the Mind. He really taught us a lot about how to make a book. So today we're going to discuss really mindfulness penetration into the consciousness of the modern world. And is that a good thing, a helpful thing, not so helpful thing? Are we, how does that relate to Buddhism, which it primarily draws from? And then although we do use a lot of terminology and jargon during the talk, I think mostly we stop and explain what it is. But one thing we didn't explain is the word Vajrayana. I think most of you know, but Vajrayana Buddhism, it's sometimes called the Diamond Vehicle, is the tradition of Buddhism that's primarily taught in Tibet, but also in other countries, including Japan and Indonesia and parts of China. And but what the distinguishing feature of Vajrayana is two things. One, that we are already perfect. We have everything we need already to be completely awake. And that awakening can happen in a single lifetime. And so therefore, that's the single lifetime is the unique property of Vajrayana, the unique promise of Vajrayana. And so now let's go right to Barry Boyce. Hello, Barry Boyce, and welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast.
Well, so happy to be here. Digitally, anyway.
Yes. Well, I was thinking today, because both you and I have had a lot of experience in bringing Buddhist ideas to a broad audience, often non-Buddhist audience. It'd be interesting for us to have a talk about, well, how do we think that's going? I mean, you know, there was this whole mindfulness craze. Everyone, I remember when I entered a 3-year retreat, nobody was talking about meditation. And then when I came out around end of 2009, suddenly there were meditation apps and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So, yeah. So what do you think?
Well, I don't have it's hard to have a comprehensive view of how it's going, because that's a very big it. But I think I can start by talking about how I got into it in the first place. I had a writing and journalism career that started in Washington, D.C. I reported on things that were going on Capitol Hill. I had training prior to that in university, and I got plenty of training while I was working as a journalist. But I'd begun meditating and become a student of Vajrayana Buddhism starting when I was 17. So
that was with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche.
Yeah, right. One of my brothers, who's 10 years older than me, started with Trungpa Rinpoche and invited me up to visit, and the rest is history.
Lucky you.
So, pardon me?
Lucky you.
Yeah, I do. I do feel lucky. I did feel lucky at the time, and that's something I definitely don't regret to this day. 50 some years later now, 51 years later, 1 year for every samskara. Um, and I've got the samskaras to show for it. Ooh, that's a bad one. That is a bad
Maybe
inside.
we'll have to edit this out.
You have to edit that right out, man. I don't know where that came from. But anyway, I was at that time in Washington. I mean, in those early days, in the 80s, I didn't talk to people about meditating, and then fast forward, many, in the mid 90s, I had moved to Nova Scotia, where the Shambhala Sun magazine was headquartered, and I became, I was already kind of friends with the people who were doing that.
Yeah.
And I got invited to start doing some writing there. And I would travel to do stories. And if somebody in an airplane asked me what I did, I would say at that point, I work for a Buddhist meditation magazine. And that would be the end of the conversation. I mean, it would be like, yeah, I gouge out the eyes of babies and pour battery acid down the holes. I mean, it was just like, yeah, no, let's just not talk about it.
This is when you were living in. Were you still living in DC at the time?
No, I was in up here in Nova Scotia
Okay.
at that time, and so I would have to travel.
That's a little different. In Boston, I think you could get away with. People would find it interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was changing in various places, but it changed quickly, no matter where I was, and I was flying all over the place, not just within Canada, and just traveling generally. But then I started to see people reading, I'd sit next to somebody and they'd be reading Emotional Intelligence or Full Catastrophe Living or something, or, I'd say to somebody, well,
maybe for the benefit of our audience, I just mentioned these are books that early on were very successful and read by a lot of people, but had buried in them a lot of Buddhist ideas.
Yeah, well, they came from, Emotional Intelligence was Danny Goleman, who's to this day still practicing Buddhist, and John Kabat-Zinn had training in both Korean Zen and Theravadan, and exposure to lots of teachers. Right. I'd say, I write for Shambhala Sun magazine. Eventually, I would be working for Mindful, and people would say, "Oh, I read that magazine," right? So I could see, okay, so there's some kind of shift.
Mindful, which you co-founded.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm the founding editor of Mindful magazine. So there was that shift that was taking place, and it was exciting to see that. As members of Buddhist communities, I think we were always trying to reach out. But I don't know, for you, at a certain point, it turned for me from not just reaching out to the people I thought would readily become involved in a Buddhist community, in particular a Vajrayana Buddhist community, but people who wouldn't necessarily enter those doors. How can we reach a broader audience of people, the people who are reading these books, and, become part of that movement, as it were?
Yes. I think that one of the things that Patrok Rinpoche and I talked a lot about is the barrier to entry in a modern Vajrayana center is pretty steep for the general public, shall we say. Of course, there are people like we see it all the time who come and it just speaks to them directly and blah blah blah. And so this was a lot of our thinking of why we wrote Radically Happy, and
well, I mean it's a very interesting topic that I think we could hang around in for a while about Vajrayana communities and reaching a larger public, because opinion alert, I have a fair number of opinions and that I've formed over the years. I hope they're informed opinions from talking to people. But anyway, they're opinions. So
yeah.
I think that...
Well, we try to have people on here who have opinions. So you've at least crossed that bar. I mean, the jury's still out on the rest of it, but at least you've crossed that bar.
Well, I've felt like leaders in communities haven't done enough contemplating of the contexts in which Buddhism exists in different places at different times. So, for example, how does the broader public in Tibet benefit from Dharma?
Mm.
And so they're already, first of all, it's an enclave. For 1,000 years, there was very little interchange with the world beyond that plateau, and which made it possible to be a great incubator for very serious practice and study and creation of texts and iconography and arts related to Dharma, you name it. So it fundamentally was a feudal system, for better or for worse. The average Tibetan would have been, those images behind you in the Thangka would not be unfamiliar or in any way exotic.
That's correct.
To that person.
Actually, one time I heard Sogye Rinpoche giving a talk where he spoke exactly about this point. And what he said is, you have to understand that in Tibet, even the thieves knew the Dharma.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a really different context for what it means to have a temple or a place to go and study and practice when you're in a culture where it's just so natural that even the thieves know quite a bit about it. So I think that's
right, and
that's the kind of summary.
So when it comes to, if you start out at a Dharma center in a Vajrayana context, and it's transformative for you and you start to buy in, so to speak, hopefully you get beyond the exoticism of Dakini images and, that, and if you remain in exoticism, I think it's a waste of time. I mean, it's just further entertainment. But so let's say you're chanting to protectors and, visualizing mandalas and, the liturgies and the iconographies, all inform your formless practice, your basic formless practice. There are supports for that.
Yes, in fact, another teacher whose name is escaping me right now, but Organ Tupgo Rinpoche often would say things like, why are we doing all these exotic practices? I mean, he didn't use the word exotic, but I'll just say it like that. And it's because ultimately, that you're connecting with the practice when your formless practice has stability. And I think this is something that's very natural. Many I would say, pre-modern Tibetans before the Cultural Revolution had some intuitive understanding of this, which is totally not the case in modern society, in my experience.
Yeah. So,
okay.
the relationship between formless practice and these manifold forms that are employed in Vajrayana, it's a subtle one. And if you get completely enmeshed in a community, you start taking that for granted.
And actually, that's right. And I would say Tugorjan said it actually in a slightly different way. And I'm not going to use his language because it'll take a lot of explaining. But basically, the gist of it is when you do form practice, you don't leave the formless behind. The formless is the basis out of which the form arises. And so that seeing those as any kind of dichotomy is an error. Means.
Well, I think it's natural that we generally enter through the relative. So I think we do.
Yeah. Well, the way to enter, really, except for a few like Garb Dorje, it's pretty unusual.
Well, and so I think when it comes to Vajrayana in the modern world, I've been in situations where people just assume all the gory imagery and language around protectors would be readily understood by somebody without you yourself doing some examination to understand the pathway that leads to that. And so even bringing people into to a Vajrayana context in the modern world where there's so much, I don't know if the word is, so much validation of the material world, right? In ancient cultures and indigenous cultures, the material world doesn't get as much validation as it does in our regular, right?
Yes, exactly. I think that's a really, really important, getting back to your original, how we got on this, tangent, is that that we have to understand the context that we were in then and the context we're in now, and understand, and some of those differences are meaningful when we try to approach it now, because now is the only time we can approach. It's the only time we can ever approach anything is now. So, but it's kind of like, to reverse it, take someone who maybe grew up in a pre-modern society and they lived on some remote island, and now we take them to New York City and start talking to them about physics and expect them to understand anything. No, they have to go to school. They aren't going to, you can't just grok physics, and so it's the same thing. So some of that actually a lot of what I learned or understand about Vajrayana was hard won through actually going to school, in essence, and really studying it and taking time to understand what it all means. And then this language is actually, you relate to it in a very, very different way. I think one thing, just for the benefit of maybe some people who have no idea what we're talking about, when we say formless practice, you can say things like meditation, or just being fully present, or nature of mind practice, where these are the kinds of things we might mean by formless practice. And practice with form is really, when I say meditation, I mean classical sitting meditation, because actually it's all meditation. When we talk about form practice, we're talking about in Vajrayana how there are elaborate mandalas to visualize, elaborate visualization practices you do. Yes. So,
and to steer us back to, so that was a sidetrack that I took us on, but I think it leads back to so I, along with so many others, began to see, Well, challenge number one is to reach people who might likely get involved in Vajrayana, but who need some handholds to get there. So we should be attentive to, being more outer facing.
Mhm.
It's so common that somebody will come into one of our communities and they'll see the ass of people more than their face, because everybody's turned inward on their, the being part of the community is so rewarding that it becomes very, and there's a code language and
Yes.
codes of behavior.
Jargon is a big thing. It's a big thing. And
What's that?
Jargon, the use of
Yeah,
jargon.
jargon, exactly.
It creates a kind of people, we lose sight of it in Vajrayana communities. The way we use English is very idiosyncratic compared to the way you could say a civilian uses English.
Yeah.
And I think that another thing too that changed a lot is like when I started, kind of everybody was a beginner together. Like the old students had been around for 7 or 8 years, and I was in awe of that. Wow, they studied for 7 or 8 years, right? But now no one thinks 7 or 8 years. Even people who are only 7 or 8 years in the Dharma may think of themselves as still beginners. Hopefully we all still think of ourselves, but definitely. And so one thing that's really, really different, and it's a plus and it's a minus, is you enter into a community as a new person and you obviously know a lot less than everybody else. You don't have this kind of, oh gosh, we're going through this crazy, hard to understand thing all together as a group.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Eric. When I began, people were, they lorded over you because they've been around for 2 years.
Right.
Right. Oh my God! You've been doing this for 2 years. Oh my God!
Yeah.
And
especially at 17, doing the same thing for 2 years seems really amazing.
Yeah, it was a big deal. Now we are in a completely different milieu in terms of Vajrayana practice, Vajrayana communities. There's all sorts of challenges there having to do with time. You said a few minutes ago that your whatever Vajrayana understanding you've developed has been hard won. And the Vajrayana does work that way. It's a lot of manual labor. And it's a challenging way to go about the Dharma. There's a kind of immediate satisfaction that comes from being involved. It's just already, I found very early on, a kind of an instantaneous recognition of well-being that, I just almost caught like a disease. But then as you start to find this, to be interested in what are the sources, what are the deeper sources of this well-being, and the work you have to do because you see all the obstacles and et cetera, et cetera. So nowadays, there was no internet when I started. Right now, I've got a list of about 10 podcasts that people have recommended that I listen to, 12 or 15 documentaries to stream, not to mention entertaining movies. Would I have done Nundro under these conditions? I don't know. I hope I would have. And I could repeat Nundro, but I don't know. I'm getting a little old for that.
I think you should do another Nundro.
Oh, thank you. That's good advice. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
what I was getting to is that I don't know about younger students today and what the milieu is for them. I don't.
But I mean, isn't this a lot just generally a challenge with how do we educate young people? I mean, I was reading an article in the New York Times the other day where it's talking about some schools now actually, after giving all the kids a computer, are starting to go in the other direction because they can't get the kids to stop watching YouTube videos and things like that. And I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just saying I think the challenge that you're talking about is ubiquitous in society right now, and I don't know. Maybe in some sense, whatever the solution is, somebody will figure it out who's richly resourced and can do the studies to figure it out, and then as Dharma centers can learn from that and adapt. But
I think that in terms of some of the young people that I'm working with these days are in their 40s, and the pathway to working with younger people for an older Dharma student is not to be the old wise elder. It's to be the listener and the learner and this is going to sound kind of maybe trite, but I just watched the last episode of Shogun last night. And so the main character.
I haven't seen it. Don't give it away. No, I'm teasing.
Well, I'll give you one line anyway that I appreciated because it accorded with my understanding of the art of war.
Yeah. I think you wrote a book about.
Yes, a couple of books.
I'm gonna. You're not very good at plugging yourself, so I'm gonna have to do it for you. Yeah. Okay. So
anyway, the one of the characters is impressed with how far-seeing the leader, Lord Toranaga, has been, and all these little things he's done. He says, well, what is it like to manipulate, to bend the wind to your will? And Toranaga says, in the best line of the whole thing, he says, I don't control the wind. I simply study the wind. Yeah. Right? So we need to, you need to study where are the people that you want to engage with the Dharma with, where are they at? Yeah. Where, and you co-created at that point. If there's value to what we bring to the table, it will emerge in the interaction. If you're trying to, and I think really the best teachers do this anyway, they invite you, they just kind of bring you in. We haven't even gotten to the main topic yet, dude. I don't know what I'm terrible that way.
Well, but it's interesting. And I had a feeling you would do this when I invited you on. So again, you're meeting my expectations. I think it's fun. I think it's very interesting. I think mostly what we're trying to do is raise issues and get people thinking. I hope that when people are listening to this, a number of the people that listen actually are longtime students of the Dharma, and some of them, like you and me, are in different ways providing spaces for people to study and practice. And hopefully this is creating a larger conversation. I mean, so I think to just bring it back maybe to what we were starting on is, so there clearly needs to be some kind of bridging activity, something that makes some people in this lifetime won't practice Vajrayana and perhaps still can benefit a lot from what we've received from our teachers. And you do see like Gomde Germany, for example, has a weekly meditation. And when I go there to teach, I often the Lama who's there is always happy because he gets a day or two off, and I lead the Monday evening practice. And it's people who never come. Many of them I've never seen at seminars at Gomde. Maybe they come at the times I'm not there, but they a lot of them I've just come just for that, and that's totally okay. But and then there are even greater hopes to establish a university, fully accredited university, kind of like what Chikini Rinpoche has done in Nepal with the Rangjung Yeshe Institute, which is an accredited. You can at least get a master's. I don't know if you can get a PhD, and then I'm sure I should know, but I don't. And then do something similar, actually, in the heart of Europe. And so these are different ways. But I think what you've also been involved in is for people who are never going to call themselves Buddhists, yet benefit so much from, you can say, the view of Buddhist practice. And there's a lot of debate about it, right? Some people, some Tibetan teachers have criticized it. And to be fair, I think some of the criticism is valid because there's a chance that what we're doing is watering down this incredibly profound and pithy lineage that's gone all the way from the lips of the Buddha into this very present moment. And could we be watering it down? On the other hand, my feeling is if everybody in the world started doing mindfulness meditation practice the way Jon Kabat-Zinn has taught it, I think the world would be a better place. And I think there'd be a lot more people who would suddenly be interested in taking the red pill. Is it the red pill? Anyway, going down the rabbit hole, going all the way. I think that there'd be a huge number of people who'd be much more interested in really deeply practicing. And because everybody's already meditating, there'd be much more social support for it. So I think both points of view are kind of valid, or they have their points. What do you think?
Well, I think, at a certain point, through various circumstances, my main interest and mission turned from mainly being interested in who we could bring into the Vajrayana community that I was part of, to this broader world of people who may or may not ever have anything to do with Buddhism per se. And, one of the ways that I got started on that is that when I was working at Shambhala Sun in, what was it? 2005, I think. I was asked to do a piece on Jon Kabat-Zinn, a profile. And at that time, I had known about Jon Kabat-Zinn's starting of mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I'd already seen it being taught, and I knew some fellow Sangha members who'd gotten involved with that. I was a serious skeptic, almost more than a skeptic.
Yeah.
I was a kind of arch-conservative Buddhist.
You're a fundamentalist.
Yeah, I was a pretty fundamentalist about the whole thing. I just didn't see how it could be translated. But using my journalistic training, I entered the whole thing with an open mind. I read everything that Jon had written and, put in lots of stickies in his book, Full Catastrophe Living. And I flew down and met him in his home in Concord, Massachusetts at the time. And, he had me in 10 minutes. Already I had been softened up by reading what he had to say. And then when I met him in person, I understood completely what his mission was. that he started practicing meditation because of pain, being in pain.
Mm-hmm.
Predominantly mental pain, so to speak, but and
how many of us got involved with meditation.
so, yeah, dukkha, first noble truth. There are, it's basically everybody and how many of those everybody are going to end up finding their way to Buddhism? They're either busy or, they're not going to go through that kind of translation process. They may be involved in another kind of spirituality. They may not, they may be, any number of reasons. So he came up with the first place to reach people might be people in actual physical pain who would immediately be drawn to the practice. So stress, by the way, basically for John was dukkha, but he couldn't call it mindfulness-based
dukkha reduction.
Dukkha reduction.
What is dukkha for the benefit?
Sorry, dukkha is Sanskrit for most often translated as suffering.
Yeah, I think it's dissatisfaction. Now that I asked you,
I think it's much better. Dissatisfaction is better. Suffering, again,
Well, suffering comes short. I cannot be suffering, but I can be dissatisfied. I wasn't satisfied. But dissatisfaction is the seed that the suffering grows out of.
Yeah, and suffering. So much of a translation of Dharma. Let's just stop there, hang out here for just a second. So, because actually teaching in a broader world involves a lot of translation. So, every word you translate into another language is going to carry some freight. So, suffering is a more dramatic word that's used in the theistic tradition. It's kind of dripping with drama. Dukkha is a little bit more basic than that. It's so deep.
Kitchen sink level.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to manifest. Yes, sometimes it'll be as, full blown as what we might call suffering. But so in any case, John, when he called it stress reduction, even that carried some challenges because stress, technically, physiologically, is a neutral. It's fundamentally neutral. If you don't have enough stress in your hand, you're not going to be able to pick up a glass. So what one is really talking about is excess stress. So you're holding on to the wheel of your car, but you notice that you're gripping it.
Yeah.
The gripping is the dukkha.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
That's an analogy. Yeah.
That you need to have something to grab onto. So anyway, I got on that mindfulness bandwagon, so to speak, and already there'd been a lot of research, so that became an interesting avenue. I wrote some pieces. After writing this profile of Jon Kabat-Zinn, I was assigned to the beat of the mindfulness world. And I started doing all sorts of stories about that, including, as I was just saying, the research. And I learned at the time that, the earliest meditation research involved a very serious Vajrayana practitioner, Francisco Varela, who, and, there were all sorts of interesting people getting together with Francisco and then with the Dalai Lama. And and I was initially.
I met Francisco because he was there when I went to first receive teachings from True Origin. Somehow, I didn't see him at Nagi, but Nagi Gompa is where True Origin lived. But I went out to dinner with friends after I came down, and he was there, and we ended up sitting next to each other by some random stroke of his misfortune and my good fortune, and found we had all kinds of. He was around MIT's AI lab, and so we knew all the same kind of people.
Oh, that's cool. Did you have a good hang with him at dinner?
Yeah. Actually, I was still too much under the influence of one of my main mentors, Marvin Minsky. So we had some interesting conversations. This is actually a whole other podcast, which I should do one day, about AI and and things like that. But yeah, it was great. He was really quite a special human being.
Well, I think that my big concern about the research, scientifically trying to objectively research what's going on with meditation, and in some ways try to prove that objectively that meditation works, was the materialism, that it was
Yes.
focusing more on brain than mind. And
Yes.
It was clear from the involvement of people like Francisco that there was a much deeper element there.
But really, this is a whole, we can do another podcast just about that.
Well, you might want to talk to somebody else about that, but where it fits in here is that the explanatory language of the modern world is science. And that it was clear that was an inevitable part of talking to people about applications of mindfulness in regular life.
Yes.
If people could be told that it was being researched, then they felt that provided some kind of validation that, in the spiritual context, the validation, a lot of it comes from authority, the authority of great teachers, the authority of institutions, and from your personal trust of practitioners whom you've met.
Mm-hmm.
In the broader world, particularly if you wanted to bring meditation into a school, which became a huge area of interest for me, that, wow, if students in school could have a few moments even of a glimpse of shamatha, basic, we'll say, well,
being fully present.
Yeah, just being fully present, generally, using the breath as an anchor for attention. And, that would be huge.
Yep.
Well, if you're trying to get into a school system, if you can show that there have been 10 National Institutes of Health funded studies, then, there's a greater chance that it can be instituted in a school system. So,
yep. I mean, I think what John Kabat-Zinn was trying to do is actually quite skillful, that he saw that meditation could be an important tool in, you can say, medicine and psychiatry, and and for that to happen, insurance companies had to feel they could fund it, and for that, you need a body of research that says, yes, in this particular situation, meditation is more efficacious than lithium or whatever the drug of choice is, and so I think that part was really smart. To play the other side, which you were hinting at, is it's also reifying something that to a real Buddhist would be quite strange, which is that there's this material world is somehow has supremacy or is primary. Buddhist philosophy, we don't deny the appearance of the material world. We just don't think it has primacy, and so we would say that would be an extreme.
Well, I think that the one of the bridging points there is, I totally agree. There are lots of materialists in laboratories for sure, and
in mindfulness-based, what is it called? MBSR, whatever it stands for.
Mindfulness-based stress reduction.
Yeah. That there's plenty of materialists who give MBSR classes too.
They talk about the neural correlates. Let's say that, there's a Tibetan term, Xinjiang, fully processed, and it's kind of based on, doing enough practice of being fully present and noticing thought and, bringing some spaciousness to that so that you have this kind of ongoing sense of well-being, let's say. So one of these research scientists is going to think, well, is there some way that I can, is that going to show up somewhere physiologically? I don't give a shit about that. I don't need that validation. But at the same time, all right, if they want to study that, fine. But what they will look for is neural correlates,
yes,
which says they're not saying that this is the experience, so to speak, but it's some kind of marker.
But that's the question, and I think different scientists will give you different answers to that question. I mean,
they definitely will.
Going back to my AI days, Dan Dennett, who recently passed away, super nice guy, but philosophically, I say pretty wrong, incorrect. And he was this extreme materialist, and said that everything could be reduced to something physical. That what we now call qualia, right? That the experience of the taste of chocolate or the color red.
Yeah.
Those all are actually just functions of a material universe. So I think this. I think that there's. I think I've made the point anyway, so we can go on.
Well, fortunately, in my experience, the average person interested in meditation doesn't get quite pulled into that extreme form of materialism. They're basically looking for some relief, and
yes, and maybe already have a set of spiritual or religious beliefs, and they're not even looking for meditation to either enhance or contradict them. They don't really, they see them as.
Yeah, but I think some of the pitfalls, to just spend a little bit of time on that. One of the big debates was, as mindfulness moved out into the broader world, detached, so to speak, from
Roots.
a spiritual tradition, was there's no ethics associated with it.
Yeah.
So the extreme version of that was to say that
A meditating to be a better sniper.
yeah, well, that was one of the prime examples, but the
sorry to interrupt you.
That you required the Eightfold Path to mindfulness meditation separated from the Eightfold Path, lost its ethical basis and would just be either pleasure or relief seeking or self-aggrandizing. And I argued with many people about that, and I was not alone in arguing this. Let's not reify the Eightfold Path as if it exists somewhere, if it exists as some material thing in the universe. It's a code made up by human beings. Human beings have all sorts of ethical codes, and somebody can practice mindfulness meditation attached to whatever ethical context they find themselves in. And one ethical context, for example, would be in any of the helping professions, the medical professions, you have the Hippocratic Oath as a code. So that obstacle, I thought that was a red herring, and I, would talk about what I would call Buddhist reactionaries, that the only people who can benefit from the kind of meditation that we do within Buddhism, the only way they can do that is to become Buddhists. And the meditation practices we do, in many ways, predate Buddhism. Buddhism absorbed them and refined them and created all sorts of support around it. But, it's to say that mindfulness awareness practice, whatever name you want to attach to it, is Buddhist, is like saying that gravity is Newtonian. Because, it's just...
it was there before Newton.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that let's take a step back, because I don't think the issue is really so much whether MBSR in particular. I'm sure it has flaws. I think it has flaws. Okay, but I don't think there's benefit in just picking on that in particular. I did start by saying I do think that the world would be a better place, a markedly better place, if everyone did an 8-week MBSR course and took it into their life. So I'm sure that, but anyway, there's some probably we can debate it. I think that there are people, for example, Thupten Jinpa, who's doing this, bringing in, you can say, bringing compassion and kindness to a broad audience, combined with meditation to address perhaps some of the perceived shortcomings. So there certainly is things we could do to address.
Well, I should be clear. I'm not talking about MBSR alone. Okay. I'm talking about all of what they call the MBIs, mindfulness-based interventions or programs, but also, what you're talking about that Jinpa's doing is compassion cultivation training. And, there's lots of people doing different kinds of blends of mindfulness with compassion practice and metta practice, loving kindness practice. Your original question was, where are we at with all that? And one of the things is that after an initial flurry of organization creating and funding, now it's not quite the fad that it was. And, we're in kind of a new world. So one organization after another is closing down. A lot of the mindfulness institutes and organizations that are university based are losing their funding or struggling to get their funding. One of the primary educational organizations, Mindful Schools, just closed its doors.
Isn't this a lot of the fact that it's just been so darn successful that pretty much everybody, and it's hard to find someone these days who doesn't know how to meditate or hasn't heard something about meditation. So people made their choice kind of already. Am I going to get into it or not? And then if every other door there's a shingle hanging out saying, I teach meditation, there's like more meditation teachers than there is actually a market for people who want to learn meditation.
I think that's right. But a good description of the time would be, I think, that the success has taken us to a particular kind of plateau where the day-to-day supports for meditation practice, which include one of the biggest ones being some kind of community and a place to do intensive practice from time to time, that doesn't really exist in a really robust way. And without those supports,
maybe that's the opportunity space for Buddhist centers.
Well, I think when you talk about the Gomde I assume it's in Vienna?
No, it's about 2 hours from Vienna.
Well,
it's in Schornstein. You must come visit one day.
One of these days, I would love to. I could brush up on my German. I studied German.
Well, you probably get away with English for most of the.
Of course. Well, those people who are coming by regularly, that is that's a place for them to plug in. That's a community. I mean, some friends of mine and I here in Halifax, we started a group in a church basement that didn't have all the trappings of the regular center. We just had a Buddha statue and a couple of candles, and that kind of open source quality was very attractive to people, and that became their Thursday night sitting became a community. We would read a little something and have a little discussion. I think maybe that is something. Also, some online stuff might be. I mean, not how to put this. I don't think it's necessarily a great value to turn meditation into largely an educational and programmatic project. I go to, I've been to hundreds of programs and talks, and just have some time to practice meditation, be with some other people, hang out, and yes, discussion, study, fine, but I know a few people who have some online communities that they participate in, and they just sit together on Zoom. I don't know, Eric, what do you think would be a way to provide more inroads and support to people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the online thing is a plus and a minus. It's a plus because, I mean, as somebody who gives these kinds of seminars, for me, I don't have to travel, sleep in an uncomfortable or at least not bed, etc. And so I'm very fresh, guaranteed. And then for other people, travel can be expensive. They don't have to go someplace special and also to pay to be at that place. So that's all the plus. The minus is, why are we learning to meditate? It's not just to be good meditators. I mean, that's actually not at all the reason. It's because that sense of being fully present is something that we can bring into every moment of our life. And then to be in a social situation, say a few minutes after the bell's rung and the meditation session is over, invariably you end up in a chat with some of the other people who you were meditating with. And you begin to see, right away, I can still have that thread of presence, even while I'm talking to the person who is on the cushion next to me. And while I'm having this tea or I'm eating cookie or I'm, and so I think this, I find this kind of social interaction just about impossible on Zoom, right? It's so, or any of the other online options.
That's a super good point. I mean, I haven't cracked this one either. That this Thursday night group I was describing has that quality you're talking about. And, I spent countless times over my so-called Buddhist career of practicing some meditation or having a class and some meditation practice and then hanging out. And you can't, the Zoom thing, like one thing, if you're hanging out with people, I mean, let's say you go out and get a bite or, a beer or whatever it is, and it's a group of people that you don't necessarily, you might move and talk to somebody else, or it's not,
it's all very fluid and organic.
It's very fluid, organic, and has all the full aspects of being with other people that this kind of this two-dimensional thing doesn't achieve. So even people in cities, I think, are finding it harder to gather in these ways.
Yes.
And then people who are not, who are remote.
Yeah, forget it. I think there's a couple big things. One is, I don't quite understand the reason for this. I came from years in Silicon Valley, which was theoretically the black hole of work. And yet it seems to me that people just generally have much less time than ever before. And so all these things we're doing, and I think some of it is just the number, like you said at one point, I have so many videos I still have to watch. Some of them, I'm sure the podcasts, some of them are amazing, like this one. And the documentaries. And then, it's nice to watch a good film or TV show every now and then. And then, and then we have all the other things we have to do. But I think also just the world's become much, much more stressful. It's a lot harder to make a living than I think it used to be. You have to work harder, longer, be better. And I think it's all just adding up. So, people don't necessarily have the time that we used to have to just be with each other. I think I could be wrong, but it appears to me.
I think there's a lot to that. All of those things. I mean, I look at I have 2 grown daughters. Their economic circumstances are much more straitened than mine were. Their housing cost, their how much they can earn, and it's much tighter and tougher.
And there's just many, many more things. That's really important what you said. And there's just many, many more things competing for our attention. And in fact, the whole Silicon Valley, Hollywood, whatever you want to call it, entertainment complex has spent bazillions of dollars studying our neurochemistry, and it's a war for attention. And so we're almost like just these little helpless flies in the wind. It's everything's just, we're just there for the picking.
Well, I mean, this is what, when meditation apps started to proliferate, I definitely had a mixed feeling about that, because the apps were using all the techniques of the attention economy,
Right.
trying to steal your attention. And I mean, the phone has become an extension of our body at this point. It's an interesting mix of good news and bad news, because what we talked about earlier, that's an exaggeration to say it's hard to run into somebody who doesn't know how to meditate. But
yeah,
I do bet everybody on my street now it's changed over the years. I've lived in the same house for 30 years. Yeah, everybody on this street works in some form of tech now. And I've talked with them. I know that they've accessed, some form of mindfulness at some point somewhere. And they're, even at work, it was introduced in some way. So there is the ubiquity of it, the validation of it as a good thing. But the actual penetration of it into people's everyday experience, like you were talking about, is there we're kind of hung up. And meanwhile, some of the attention has been taken away, for better or for worse, by the psychedelics revolution.
Yes.
That is also, I think, a mixed blessing. I think it's doing a lot of good, but it's also has the quality of chasing experience.
Yes. Well, this is interesting. It's almost like coming full circle for me, because when I started and you started in Buddhism, actually, so many of the people in you can say, American Dharma center, in some way were there because of psychedelic drugs. It was really, really, yes, me too. Super, super common. And because it shook us up in a way that was important. And then, of course, it was also an obstacle because we were all still grasping after experience. But because we came into Dharma and met these mind-blowing teachers, they knew kind of what to do to work us over and help us. But I do think drugs for a lot of us were, although they brought us to the Dharma in some sense, they were also an obstacle once we were in. So now you have it going the other way. And there are even people who are trying to claim, and I might have someone on who in the future who will talk about this, trying to claim that it could be an aid to Dharma practice. And my own personal feeling is yes, but if you're really, 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 really stable, then I can see how it could be an aid, right? But if not, it's just why. I mean, in Vajrayana, we're doing is we're constantly working with experience. Everything's a hallucination. Everything is, we're never seeing reality completely accurately. So wherever you go, there's your mind, there's experience. Now we give you some tools to work with it. I don't see why we need to then create special experiences in order to work with it, because it's just experience. Experience is experience is experience.
Yeah, well, there's therapeutic uses of it, of course, too. And I think one of the things that interests me about pretty much every drug experience I've had, and most of them are not recent. There's a there's a hangover or a come down or there's that kind of contrast.
Yep.
And of course, in the more advanced ways of talking about psychedelic experience, a lot of emphasis is put on integrating and that phase of coming out of it. I wouldn't compare that to most intensive practice I've done. Hasn't resulted in a hangover, really.
But you do need to do maybe some kind of integration activity. But there definitely, I know what you mean.
The integration is well, I don't know, is easier in a sense. There's this quality of you have a byproduct more than a hangover. It makes it, you could describe it, I would say, is it when you come out of a retreat, there's the shock of, as I would say, when you're in retreat, it's like you're on top of the mountain, you look down and, everything's working beautifully together. And when you come down off the mountain, you see what was working beautifully together involves two people having a knockdown, drag out fight with each other as you get closer in. So you find yourself back in the world, but the byproduct is some kind of interruption of your
normal mode of being, which actually isn't serving you all that well to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. That to me is, because if you have the experience that was the high, then you think, oh, well, what I'm supposed to do is get back to
the high.
That's
exactly trying to point out what that's maybe even a much better and more succinct way to make the point I was trying to say. Experience is experience is experience. And the key point is learning how to work with whatever experience we're having. We're always having experience. This is the most beautiful, amazing thing about Vajrayana practice is there isn't a single moment of the day that couldn't be practice.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a good place to leave things for today. Even.
Yeah. No, I think it is that. I mean, the last thing I would say there is that so we have the good news and the less good news. Good news is it's more ubiquitous and more valued and understood, and people have some experience of it. And the more difficult news is there's more stressful times, making it more difficult for people to integrate it in their lives. There's all these pressures to time, and there's the experience and attention industry out there and the basic mode of the practices that we're interested in sharing with people is not to have an experience that you want to concretize and hold on to.
Which goes against everything we normally try to do.
Yeah, exactly. It is paddling upstream, but it's.
I think that if I could make one takeaway from this conversation that I found interesting is that I think that one thing we're facing with is, guess what? Things change. And they're constantly changing. And perhaps now we're in a weird time where they're changing very, 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 very quickly, and it seems somewhat unrelenting. But the best thing I can say I learned from my teachers is you never fight the change. Change is the one reliable thing about existence, and fighting it is denying the magnificent opportunity that this very moment presents.
No, that's a super good point. You always need to study the wind.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a great,
great
That's great.
Not think, well, if we could just go back to how it was. No, we've got to see what can we, right now I'd say I'm very uncertain, but curious.
Yep. Me too.
And I've also picked up a lot from this conversation. It's been great to bat these things around.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, what people don't know is this is how we actually talk anyway, and we just and recorded it.
I pretty much forgot most of the time that this was a podcast. So
well, then I at least did one thing right. So I want to thank you very much, and I'm going to ask you, please come back. I think that there's so much we could have touched on, and you have such a rich experience. Next time, I want you to tell stories of some of the teachers that you met, and good. I'll give you time to think about which ones you can tell, and then but please come back, and thank you for coming today.
Well, thanks. It was fun to hang out, and I hope it's of some value to folks out there. So,
well, that, as we say, is out of our hands. Okay, nice to see you.
Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, we like to invite you to continue the journey into the heart of enlightened mind at gonde.eu.